Euthanasia is being offered as a form of compassion, an act of mercy. But is it really? We'll talk about that and more in this edition of Life Matters with Brian Johnston, Western Regional Director of the National Right to Life Committee. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back to Life Matters, your program on life, culture, and the very real battle of ideas. And you're in this battle. Even if you don't think you are, you are. And the ideas are aimed square, right, at the target of your mind. So you have to wrestle with these ideas and come to an understanding of what really matters in life. This particular program, I visit with a few different people that I met at the National Right to Life Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was a great convention. We had the governor there, Governor Scott Walker, who really has been resolute in defending life, and even in the face of opposition. David DeLayden, who had recorded those videos of Planned Parenthood admitting that they were selling organs, dickering over prices, explaining how they could change the method of killing so as not to crush certain organs they were selling. Carol Tobias, there were many, many others, so we're going to visit briefly today with a couple of folks. Wesley J. Smith. Wesley has been an attorney for many years, an advocate for the vulnerable, and he's written voluminously. So I interview Wesley about his most recent book. And then I also had a little time with Bobbie Schindler. Bobbie Schindler is the brother of Terri Schiavo, if you recall, years ago. Terri Schiavo was an individual who was killed through intentional dehydration. Her family fought for her, but her estranged husband had the right to make the determination. She was not terminal, and this is happening a lot. You need to understand that this is not being used against terminal people. This is being used against people we just don't want around anymore. So it's a very serious issue, and we'll just head right in now to the interviews from the National Right to Life Convention. By the way, go ahead online. You can actually get the tapes, and there literally were more than 100 different workshops designed to equip you for this battle for life. So go to nrlc.org. That's NRLC for the National Right to Life Committee, nrlc.org, and find out more information. Welcome back to Life Matters. I'm Brian Johnston, and I bumped into an old friend, Wesley J. Smith, and he is one of the heroes of the pro-life movement. I want Wesley to tell you about his latest book. Whatever Wesley has written, it's always been good, it's always been insightful, it always cuts down to what really matters in the battle for life. Wesley, good to have you here.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it a lot.
Tell us about your book.
Yeah, it's called Culture of Death, The Age of Do-Harm Medicine. And it is a warning of the modern bioethics movement and how these forces are trying to destroy Hippocratic oath practice of medicine to the point that death is seen as a medical treatment and people are not seen as having inherent equal value rather than a sanctity of life ethic. Many in bioethics promote and pursue a, quote, quality of life ethic, and those deemed to have a lower quality of life, that's invidious discrimination, will be deemed to have less right to medical treatment and may even be refused wanted life-sustaining treatment that a doctor may think is not worth providing because of cost or because of ideology.
That's right. And you just touched on something, as you and I know. In the debate about assisted suicide, it was often sold as autonomy. You know, it's your decision. But in point of fact, what the law did is it didn't free you as an individual. It freed the assistant in assisted suicide. It freed a third party to be involved to provide deadly medicine. So that's what changes in assisted suicide. It's not about the individual's rights. It's actually about the right for medicine to be used against them.
Assisted suicide is a symptom more than it is a cause. It is a symptom of a loss in belief in human exceptionalism, the intrinsic dignity of human life, the sanctity of human life, the worth of every human being as an equal.
Yes.
So what you have is it's a very nihilistic movement, mainly promoted by very well-off, if I may say white, the types who live in Marin County, who want what they want.
Yes.
And don't care who gets hurt. Meanwhile, there are a lot of people who have trouble getting access to quality medical treatment. Now, Medicaid is going to pay thousands of dollars, $3,500 as I recall, for assisted suicide when some people on Medicaid can't even find doctors to give them proper care. It's a travesty. And something else has happened in California that I'm the only one who reported. A regulation was passed after the assisted suicide law went into effect. And you're a former commissioner, so this
Commissioner on Aging, yes.
Yeah, this should impact you too. The state hospitals passed a regulation, which doesn't go through the legislature, in which people who are involuntarily hospitalized in California mental hospitals, if they are diagnosed with a terminal illness, can be petitioned to be released from the mental hospital in order to access assisted suicide. These are people who are involuntarily committed, who by definition aren't capable of making their own decisions, or they wouldn't be involuntarily committed, who have the right to petition to be released. Let's say they're committed because they're suicidal.
Right.
Then they get a cancer diagnosis. They can petition to be let out to commit suicide that they've wanted to always commit. And it's even worse. If a court won't release them, then the state under this regulation is required to facilitate access to assisted suicide, meaning you now have state potential involvement in ending the lives of people who are under their care by definition, their wards.
They're dependent.
They're dependents. And to whom they owe fiduciary obligations.
Exactly.
This is a tremendous corruption. I don't know of any cases that this occurred yet, but it shows you the mindset.
Yes.
Within weeks of that law going into effect, this regulation was promulgated and the media didn't report on it.
No. Yeah, there was a recent case in Alameda County. CANR, California Association of Nursing Home Reform, for nursing home reform, prevailed because many nursing homes, you already know this, they'll declare someone to be incompetent and then they'll start making medical decisions for them. Well, the most common medical decision in a nursing home is no more treatment, no more care, and now that includes food and water. And so CANR prevailed, and the Judge Morrell in Alameda County found that these people are being deprived of their life without due process of law.
I'm so happy to hear that.
But they're going to win because that's under appeal.
Yes.
And while it's under appeal, they can continue to do this. Senator Pan...
It isn't stayed?
No, the decision has been stayed.
The decision has been stayed because of the appeal.
Yeah, and so they're continuing doing this. Senator Pan of Sacramento, you might remember his name, he's Senator Death. He's a doctor senator. He basically has a bill that says, we'll provide due process. This is what they can do. When someone is declared incompetent, all the administrators have to do is hand them a note that says, you're declared incompetent.
So an incompetent person is going to get a note to tell them they're incompetent, which they won't understand.
Exactly. And then you're free to take away their food and water. You have fulfilled due process for them.
There was a case I was involved in, maybe it's been 20 years almost, Robert Wendland.
Yes.
And I was deeply involved in that case, trying to help save his life. He was a man who had been unconscious, and he came out of his unconscious condition, was able to roll a wheelchair down a corridor. And then the wife, it's kind of pre-Terri Schiavo, only he was in a better cognitive condition than she was, wanted to pull his feeding tubes, and the bioethicists in California, Santa Clara University and others, went to her side to try to get her to try to make sure she could pull the feeding tube of a man who would do therapy like little bowling balls down, and he could roll a wheelchair. We won at I say we very loosely, but I was part of this coalition, won at the trial level. At the Court of Appeals, it was an unbelievable decision. The Court of Appeals ruled that there is no guarantee of a right to life under the California Constitution. Luckily, the Supreme Court of California overturned that decision, that shows you the mindset. But even the Supreme Court said this only applies if somebody is not deemed unconscious. If somebody is deemed unconscious, they do not have that right, which the right was that they have a right to due process because of state action in this kind of condition. I don't want to get too technical.
Sure.
So if somebody is awake and aware, they have a constitutional right in California. But if they are diagnosed as not being awake and aware, and we know that 42% of those are misdiagnosed.
That's right.
Then they don't have constitutional rights. That's unequal treatment, and that's what the culture of death brings you.
That's right. This will empty out nursing homes whenever they want to as administrators. If they're getting enough money that they want, then they'll leave the people there. But if they can get...
Pardon me for being cynical. Once the private funds run out and they go on to Medicaid, suddenly they'll have a life not worth living.
That's right. This is what's happened in the Netherlands, and this is what happens wherever you say that there are certain lives that are no longer protected under the law. That class of persons expands and
Absolutely.
expands. You cannot stop it.
In Belgium, under their euthanasia law, you actually have elderly couples who receive joint euthanasia, not because they're sick now, but they're worried about future grief if one of them dies.
Yeah.
And in one case, and I believe I write about this in The Culture of Death, in one case, the death doctor was procured by their son.
Oh.
And the son was interviewed by a British newspaper, I think it was the Daily Mail, but it might have been The Guardian. And the son said, well, this was the only choice we had because I would not have been able to take care of them. Talk about abandonment.
Exactly.
And
he's the heir.
And in Belgium, they have now conjoined the euthanasia of mentally ill people or people with neuromuscular disabilities and organ harvesting.
Yep.
I predicted that back in 1993. I was called an alarmist. I was just prescient because the logic is clear.
That's
Once
right.
you accept the premises of the culture of death, there is actually no bottom.
That's right. Exactly right.
It's just a matter of how long it takes. Some places go longer, some places go quicker.
That's right.
But we are a logical species, and powerful forces are set in motion that take you down a path.
That's right. That's right. I'm talking to Wesley J. Smith at the National Right to Life Convention, and be sure to look out for his new book.
Culture of Death, The Age of Do-Harm Medicine.
And you can find out that this battle is very real. We're in a battle of ideas, and in this battle, it's not a metaphor, it's not hyperbole. In this battle, lives are at stake. So make sure that you're equipped.
You're listening to Life Matters. If you'd like more information on the current threat posed by euthanasia, for any donation of $15 or more, we will send you the dynamic book, Death as a Salesman, What's Wrong with Assisted Suicide, by Brian Johnston. This dynamic book has been instrumental in opening the eyes of individuals and lawmakers across the nation and around the world. Call us at 800-924-2490, and we'll be glad to send it out to you. Or visit us online at californiaprolife.org. Life Matters is a production of California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life. And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back to Life Matters, your program on life, culture, and the battle of ideas. I'm at the National Right to Life Convention, and I bumped into an old friend, Bobbie Schindler. You actually probably know Bobbie's sister best, Terri Schiavo. And Bobbie has been carrying her fight and her message since that time. In 2005 is when Terri passed, and that was a national issue. Bobbie's concern is that a lot of people don't understand what's happening, the issue of denial of food and water, and that's a concern we've had for a long time. So, Bobbie, it's good to have you on.
Oh, thank you. It's great seeing you.
Yeah, you too. So, tell us about the foundation first.
Sure. It was in response to what happened to my sister. Our family wanted to continue to advocate for the medically vulnerable persons out there, similar situations that we experienced trying to protect Terri. So we established this nonprofit, and when we work day to day advocating for families that are in situations trying to protect their loved ones from really an aggressive healthcare system that's working every day to deny care to individuals, depending on the situation. So we try to do our best to advocate for these individuals.
This is critically important, and I'll give a little background on why this has happened. It's always been ethically acceptable for a physician to say, look, I've done everything I can, and now I can't do anything more. Remember in the old movies, well, he's in the hands of the man upstairs now. That's been an ethical standard in medicine for a long time, but doctors have been committed to do all they can, but they know that they're not God. And so there was a change, though, in 1988 when the American Medical Association redefined the term medical treatment to include providing basic food and water. Food and water is not medical treatment. That's called comfort care, true comfort care. We need that for sustenance. That's basic care. That's de minimis required for you and I to live. So that was never considered medical treatment. And through the history of medicine, again, medicine going all the way back to Hippocrates, where Hippocrates swore that medicine would never kill, would do no harm. So this is a dramatic change, just that little subtle change in definition, calling food and water medical treatment. Doctors say, well, we're just ceasing medical treatment. Well, I'm sorry, that's not medical treatment. That is essential care for life. And then the reason you can understand this is a problem is that Terri didn't die of any terminal illness. And by the way, I get these calls regularly. I had 2 calls like this just last week, Bobbie. The individual does not die from an underlying condition. They don't die from heart disease. They don't die from cancer. They die because they don't get food and water. This is intentional medical neglect. This is intending the death of the patient, and very few people are prepared for it. So tell us, the Terri Schiavo Foundation, what all do you do and how do you reach out and what can people do?
Well, you're exactly right. And that's our main focus is the food and water issue. And that's what we try to do to really alert people to the fact that, as you said, Brian, that food and hydration has now been reclassified as medical treatment. It's no longer considered, at least in the medical profession, as basic and ordinary care. So it's legal in all 50 states to either withdraw or deny food and hydration through a feeding tube to individuals if they decide that that's what they want to do, meaning physicians or ethics committees or whoever it might be in these positions to make these types of decisions. So we do our best to intervene and help families that reach out to us for help where this type of denial of care is what they're facing. And I, quite honestly, it's my hot button, this food and water issue. And I explain this to be very similar to the Roe versus Wade decision in the abortion issue. The fact that food and water has been reclassified as medical treatment essentially opened up Pandora's box, as I said, to, in certain situations, they can easily deny it or withdraw it from individuals that are not dying and that in fact are being sustained by just food and hydration and are now subject to it being removed because of this reclassification.
That's right, and you have to realize this is not happening in a vacuum. This is coming at the same time where there's talk of the healthcare reform acts that we're talking about. Obamacare was a sweeping change in the nature of the medical profession, regardless of what Congress ends up doing with Obamacare. It has changed medicine. You can see this in other places where the government becomes the responsible party. In Canada, in any socialist country, it changes medicine such that there's a vested interest to not keep people around. They cost too much. And therefore the decision, and it's usually made by the physician. You know, even in assisted suicide, it was pretended, well, this is what the individual wants. But if you really think about it, throughout the history of assisted suicide, the physician makes a decision whether they're going to grant that. And usually, and this has been the history of medicine, if that request is made, the physician says, well, let's talk about it. Because the desire for suicide is an expression of a deeper issue. It's a universal cry for help. And throughout medical history, the doctor would redirect that emotional outcry. Now, they have the option of doing that or saying, yeah, in your case, I will use medicine to kill you. It's actually the assistant in assisted suicide that makes the decision whether or not medicine will be used to kill. It's not an individual's freedom. That's not what's at stake in assisted suicide, even though it was sold that way. Ultimately, those who are assisting are the real decision makers. And that now has crept into the rest of medicine, where the provision of food and water, even people who want it, if you have a will to live that says, I want food and water, that can be changed by medical professionals. And people don't understand that. And unless you're prepared to advocate for your loved one, unless you're prepared to step forward when that's happening, just as the Schindlers did as a family, you have to be ready to fight. And it's something that it's family members, ultimately, that are going to have to speak up, and you may have to retain an attorney.
Yes, and that's the situations that we deal with day to day. Many times it is finding an attorney that will intervene and try to help families, but what you're saying is exactly right. I mean, this is probably many people can guess, this is cost-driven. It's much cheaper to end someone's life than it is to continue care for them. And in the case of food and hydration being reclassified, this was done deliberately. It was done in order to make it so people that were living too long by food and hydration were costing too much. It gave them the opportunity to end their lives by reclassifying food and hydration as a medical treatment.
Mm-hmm. Great. We're talking to Bobbie Schindler, and you're listening to Life Matters. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to Life Matters.
Well, hi. I just wanted to thank you for joining me. You know, I have good friends, children, young adults, and adults that have Down syndrome. And they are so loved. Their parents love them so much because they're the happiest people you'd ever want to know. I really love them. I'm going to tell you something, though, that's rather frightening. The government of France has now prohibited showing positive images of Down syndrome children and letting parents know how lovable they are. That's an actual law in France. Here in the U.S., 80-some-odd% of Down syndrome kids are killed by abortion before they're born. In France, it's 96%. So we're not a whole lot better. If you'd like to help out, you can go to the National Down Syndrome Society, ndss.org, to help out. That's ndss.org. We really are in a battle of ideas, and lives really are at stake.
Here's a question we received from a listener.
This is Grace from Santa Rosa. Who is Charlie Gard? I've heard his name, but don't understand the story.
Well, Grace, that's a great question. Charlie Gard is a young boy born in England, and he was born with a rare mitochondrial condition that affected his brain development. Now, it turns out that there are resources in the United States that are addressing this illness. Some of these resources are experimental, but they're providing hope. In England, it's not available. And in England, as you probably know, they have socialized healthcare run by the government. You can't be a doctor, really, of any degree. Most all doctors there, to some degree, are paid through the state. Now, what happened when Charlie was born, the parents were deeply concerned. He was doing better than they expected. They had a fundraiser, and they raised $1.5 million British pounds. That's more than 2 million American dollars, in order to send Charlie to the States for treatment. But you know what? The Greater Ormond Hospital declared no, he has to die with dignity. They wouldn't even let him go. They appealed to the British courts, and the British courts made a ruling. They decided the hospital knows best. The government healthcare system knows best. We don't care if you have the money. They say he should die, he dies. They appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, which is in Strasbourg. That court, again, sided with the bureaucrats. What this shows is that when medicine and when medical ethics are being controlled by the government, they control who lives or dies. It isn't about who they're going to care for, that they're going to care for everyone. That isn't what happens. They can't care for everyone. The problem with socialized medicine is it empowers the government over life and death decisions. Again, Charlie's parents have raised this money. They love their son. Their son is still fighting. And they said, as long as he fights, we're going to fight. It's critically important to understand who Charlie Gard is and what's at stake. And what's at stake whenever we allow the government to control people's health care. It isn't about being good to everybody. It's about controlling everybody's life, ultimately. The government will decide. This should be a real lesson to Americans who think that socialized medicine is the way we should go.
Wordsworth here. Get your Wordsworth. Wordsworth here. Get your Wordsworth.
Just like at a ball game, you can't know the players without a program. Wordsworth is that part of our program that helps you look at the real meaning of words and phrases that are being used against you and against the value and significance of individual lives.
This is that part of our program that we call Wordsworth. We call it Wordsworth because words are important. And in this battle of ideas, the ideas are always expressed in words. If you think a word means one thing, but the speaker actually means something entirely different, you can get caught. You can get trapped. And in this battle of ideas, you know what's at stake? Human lives. Human lives are at stake in the battle of ideas. One of the phrases I'd like to spend just a moment on is the idea of futile care. Futile care often is assumed to refer to extraordinary care. It's not used that way anymore. In fact, it's critically important to see how it's being used and be armed and prepared to deal with making sure that you or a loved one gets proper care. You see, extraordinary care is when things go far and beyond what's necessary for the particular moment. And this has always been ethically acceptable. If you've heard of triage treatment, physicians have always been in a position where they can't do everything. Or after they've done everything they can, there's nothing more they can do. In the old black and white movies, remember, in fact, it was George Gipp, who was portrayed by Ronald Reagan in the Newt Rockney story, that old black and white movie. Very common phrase in many old black and white movies where a doctor's at the bedside and he pulls off his gloves and says, "I've done all that I can." He's in the hands of the man upstairs now. That's an admission that physicians are limited. So we're not saying that physicians have to keep doing everything all the time, keep bringing those paddles 30, 40, 50 times in the case of a heart attack. No, there is a place where we've done all reasonable and all best efforts. And then beyond that, it's extraordinary. For those of you of a Catholic background, Pope Pius XII in 1958 said very clearly for Catholics that it's clear, and he was speaking about an ethical principle that extends beyond Catholicism. He said that to withdraw extraordinary care in circumstances can be ethical. But what's implicit in that is that there's such a thing as ordinary care. And that's why we have to talk about this new phrase called futile care. Because futile care, as it's used now, often does not refer to the care or treatment. Now it's being used to refer to giving someone food and water. It's futile to continue the person's life. So the adjective futile isn't being used to refer to the care, because giving someone food and water is very, very effective for its purpose, which is to keep you alive. It keeps you alive right now. It keeps me alive. It keeps the elderly alive in every nursing home. But if food and water is taken away from them, they're going to die. That's ordinary care. And the term futile is actually being applied to the person's life. It's a declaration that we don't want grandma around anymore. She's lived her life. We're done with her. And what we're going to do is ensure she's dead by taking away her food and water. So the term futile is designed to apply to the person. It's an adjective being used against a human being. If they're not talking about extraordinary care, again, providing food and water is ordinary. It's extremely effective. It's not futile as a form of care. It does its job very, very well. The problem is medical ethics has changed. Be prepared in the battle of ideas. Language will be used, and this language is used against the most vulnerable. Again, medical ethics is there to protect the vulnerable. The whole profession exists for the sake of the vulnerable. Every one of us will be vulnerable at some point in our lives when we're very, very young in the womb. But now medicine can kill in the womb. When we're older, if we get very ill, and when we're at our extreme in age, we're vulnerable. We do want to die of an underlying illness, not want to, but we all may die of an underlying illness. That's not what's being discussed. What's being discussed in the case of withdrawing food and water is intending this person to die because we've neglected the basics of life. Futile care is a very, very dangerous term. Make sure you understand what's happening when people exercise it.
Learn more about everything in today's show online at lifematters.life, where you'll find all the resources you need to protect life. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.